everyone for joining us this evening. And I especially want to thank Charles, District Secretary Charles Bridle, for facilitating the registration and facilitating tonight's session. Charles will mute you so that we're all muted during our speaker's presentation. If you have questions for our speaker, please put them in the chat box. And we will have a wrap up with DG Mark at the end of the session and introduce our January focus. So at this point, I would like to call on Nilam Bedi. Nilam is the chair of our District Environmental Action Committee. And I would like Nilam to give us the context for tonight's talk and
Dan, where'd you put the pens?
And introduce our guest speaker. So Nilam, over to you.
Thank you, PDG Beth. It's a pleasure to see all of you here, and I'm seeing people still joining in. So by the time my kind of peripheral stuff is done and our chief speaker is here, we will have more in attendance. Now, to set the context briefly, I'm going to share my screen if Charles will allow me to do that.
Go right ahead, yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, as tonight's topic, climate solutions, it's a global to local component, and we're bringing it to you as the Environmental Action Committee of the district. Now, this is a brand new committee this year, and Rotary's also set up a new 7th area of focus, the environmental sustainability. And assisting me as chair of this really sort of grassroots committee this year, I have 9 other members. The names are over here. I will not introduce them right now because I think we don't have the time, but if we have some time at the end, we'll make sure that all of you know. So it's a pretty diverse committee with a couple of Rotaractors in there and representation from across the district. Now, climate change is the theme tonight. Now, we've all heard about climate change. We hear about, scary pictures. Now, the Alaskan glacier. So here's a compare and contrast from 1940 to 2004. Look, the same spot, what's happening. You have the whole Arctic sea melt from September to 1984 to 2016. So these images are all captured by NASA, other scientists. So they show, I think the pictures speak more than 1,000 words. And as we start looking at other impacts of climate change, I've drawn a few smattering of images from around the world. On the top left-hand corner, there is a picture of water shortage in Kenya, Kakamega, Kenya. On the right, there is a picture of floods in India, waste pickers in Cambodia, drought. So these are all pretty drastic pictures. And the scientists also take a look at, they measure stuff, and for us lay people, it doesn't always hit the mark, but emissions in gigatons, which is like a million tons each. And so, looking at charting our progress, how we are doing. So a lot of the world has its eye on it. And so as we go in, but we don't need to go far ahead. Our own city here, Toronto, and if you look back around the 2000 and project it to another 40, 50 years ahead, our temperatures are increasing, going in from, the highest were around the 37. So we are likely to be hitting a high of 44. The number of hot days increasing threefold, the extended heat waves. So on and on, there's a lot of data on that. And again, even close to home, what the city right now is looking at the projections, what will take. Now, these are all, I think, not to scare us, but I think that's the whole the context of climate change. And the reason why we chose climate change as a topic for tonight, you may say, well, you're the Environmental Action Committee, why just climate change? Now, climate change is our inaugural talk, partly because, two reasons. Climate change is the biggest overarching environmental issue of our time right now. And many of the other environmental concerns can ultimately be linked to climate change in one way or another, directly or indirectly. Now, it may be tempting to think that climate change is such a huge and complex issue that it is too complex and therefore beyond the capacity of individuals or a single Rotaract or Interact club to make a dent. Or we may think that the governments or organizations such as the United Nations are taking care of it. Now, this is not necessarily a useful way to frame this problem. The hard reality is that ultimately all this has a local aspect. Global agreements and national policies will not be effective unless we all do our part. And we are lucky tonight to have Dr. Elizabeth Bagley present to us on this topic. And she will help us in two ways. One, break this complex issue into its component parts, and then talk about what we can do at a practical level. Now, as director of Drawdown Learn at Project Drawdown, she connects people with the most impactful climate change solutions that are relevant, researched, and relatable to audiences wanting to take action on this issue. Before joining Project Drawdown, Dr. Bagley directed sustainability efforts at the California Academy of Sciences and designs the science content for video games at Leapfrog. And that's very interesting because video games are a very important communication tool. Dr. Bagley also has a wide-ranging experience in environmental issues, including studying coral reefs, sea turtles, and butterflies in Kenya. And she has worked as a naturalist in the Glacier National Park. She's an experienced naturalist, environmental educator, and has taught middle and high school science in Louisiana, K-12 science pedagogy to teachers, science communication to graduate students at the University of Illinois. And to top it all, she holds not one, but two joint PhDs in environment and resources and education psychology from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And she also has a joint Master of Science degrees in conservation biology, sustainable development, and educational psychology. I could go on and on about her credentials. And I'm sure you will find her presentation tonight both interesting and informative. And as Beth says, as we go along, put your question marks, and maybe you should precede your questions with the question mark so that whoever is monitoring with DG Mark and a couple of others will be able to see those. Now, as I get ready to hand over the mic to Elizabeth, I must mention that it has been a joy working with her in the last few weeks. And and especially since I found out she had spent a lot of time in Kenya, which is my home country. And we had the opportunity to exchange some banter in Swahili. And we were toying with the idea of having the whole presentation in Swahili tonight, but I think we decided to do that in English, except for this little bit. Nimefurahi kukona, karibuni Daktari Elizabeth. Over to you.
Asante sana Nilam. Oh my goodness, you are warming my heart so much. And don't worry, everyone, my Swahili is oh wow, I definitely won't be presenting in Swahili tonight, but what an absolute pleasure it is to be with all of you. And thank you for that incredibly incredibly warm welcome. I am just thrilled to be here. I'm going to start. I'm actually going to share my, let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And we're going to make sure y'all can see it. Thanks, everybody. Okay, can I just get a thumbs up if folks can see it? Great. All right. Well, as I said, it is such a pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm Elizabeth, and I am coming to you from Sitka, Alaska, which is the land of the Tlingit, and they have stewarded this land since time immemorial. And I'm so grateful for the learnings that I gather every day from the Tlingit people. So I want to start today by asking you a question and getting you to kind of warm up your fingers. And that question is, what comes to mind when you think of climate change and global warming? So go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat box, please. All right, we've got the brave first one: drought, disasters, famine, heat. What else do people think about? Icebergs melting, flooding, rising sea levels, mass migration, conflict, change that is not good for the human race. We have carbon dioxide emissions. Whew, okay, I'm going to take a deep breath. Less biodiversity, water, the health of our children, food insecurity, hot temperatures, floods, severe storms. We worry about our kids. We worry about our grandchildren, the end of the world, earthquakes. Oh my gosh, I feel like I need a doomsday track in the back of my reading right now, folks. This is some real heavy stuff. And I just really want to acknowledge that, that when we often think about, and thank you for all of your contributions to the chat, when most of us think about climate change and global warming, those are the kinds of things that come to mind. And, you know, we're not alone, because 2 years ago, there was a study done with 14,000 people from all around the globe. And when those people were asked the exact same question, 44% of those folks talked about outcomes. They talked about a lot of the same things you just talked about. They talked about things like changing weather, melting ice caps. About 18% of people talked about causes. They talked about things like burning fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. So that's a pretty big chunk of those people talking about the outcomes of climate change, talking about the causes of climate change. But here's where I want to pivot. Only 3% of those 14,000 people said anything about solutions. So if we weren't thinking about solutions, we are definitely not alone. And I really think that there is an incredible opportunity here to start a conversation about climate solutions so that we can work together in our Rotary Clubs, in our communities, in our businesses, to really start to put climate solutions into action. I could go on and on about the work that I'm starting to do here in Sitka, Alaska, where instead of talking about the problems and arguing over political differences, I'm working with the most conservative assembly member on solutions, because honestly, I don't really care about what he thinks science is saying. I know what science is saying. I want him to buy into the solutions. And that's where we're focusing. And that's where I think the future is absolutely headed. So my hope today is that after our conversation, solutions will actually be one of the first things that comes to mind when you think about climate change and global warming. I know that in the Toronto area, you're already doing really important, incredible work around climate change. And I hope that you'll find some new solutions that you might want to explore throughout the talk. So you might be wondering, well, great, Elizabeth, what are the solutions? I hear about the problem all the time, but what are the solutions? Ta-da, we have a poster that will soon be available on our website. And these solutions are exactly the reason that led to the formation of the nonprofit I work for. So I work for a group called Project Drawdown, which is the world's leading resource on climate solutions. We specifically focus on solutions. In 2017, we came out with a New York Times bestseller called Drawdown. And since then, Project Drawdown has really emerged as a leading resource for information and insight about climate solutions around the globe. Our latest publication, which I highly encourage you to download for free on our website is drawdown.org, and I can put that in the chat later. It's called the Drawdown Review. It's available in English, in French, and in Spanish. And it's the latest update to our research, kind of bringing solutions into 2020. Now, where do we get all of the research, all the data that we rely on? Well, we conduct a rigorous review and assessment of climate solutions that are in place, in hand today, not things that are going to be possible in 10 years, but things that we actually know work today. So we survey the landscape, we survey the peer-reviewed research, and these are some of the folks that do it, right? These are some of our research fellows who work with us from anywhere from 3 months to much, much longer, really focusing on the different dimensions of climate change solutions. We also create compelling and human-centered communication across a number of different mediums. So we have kind of our science researchers, and we have our communication and education teams who work together to inspire people to actually put these solutions into action. So you might be wondering, okay, what in the world is this word that you keep using, Elizabeth? I don't get it. Well, great question. Drawdown is actually a scientific term. And it's a scientific term that indicates, let's imagine that the red line with all the squiggles is the concentration of heat trapping gases in the atmosphere over time. So imagine an x-axis, which is time, a y-axis, which is the concentration in the atmosphere. So the moment of drawdown is this moment right here, this blue dot. And that blue dot is the moment in time when those heat trapping gases stop increasing and start to steadily decline. Now, this is really a critical turning point for life on Earth. And it's one that we must reach as quickly, as safely, and as equitably as possible. But how in the world, man, like it took a while and we got to that point. How in the world do we reach the moment of drawdown? Well, to reach drawdown, we often at Project Drawdown think about the climate equation. So bear with me here, and please imagine that this gray rectangle consists of all of the heat trapping gases that humans have put into the atmosphere over time. So we've got those heat trapping gases, and you might wonder, well, where in the world did they come from, right? What is putting them in there? We know, science tells us exactly where those gases come from. About a quarter of those heat trapping gases comes from the ways we use and produce electricity. About another quarter come from the ways we use our food, land use, and agriculture sector. We have about 21% from industry, 14% from transportation, 6% from buildings, and 10% from other energy-related emissions. This, everybody, is how those gases get there. We know how they got there, which is great. We also know where they can go. We know how nature helps us. So about 40% of those heat-trapping gases from the atmosphere are removed by nature. And this is nature all by itself doing what it does best. But for those of you who did some quick math in your head, there's still about 60% of those heat trapping gases that are left behind. And that's what's creating the thick blanket around the planet. So knowing where those heat trapping gases are coming from, right? Knowing the sources, as well as knowing the sinks, really can help us identify the suite of climate solutions that we can implement as a global society to reach drawdown. And that's what I want to introduce you to today, the drawdown framework for climate solutions. So one of the areas, this is going to look really familiar because these are the exact same categories of sources we just talked about. So one of the ways that we can start to reach drawdown is by doing, we call them the 3 S's. The first S is reducing sources. We need to stop the sources of heat trapping gas pollution. So we need to focus on electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, transportation, and buildings. We also, though, need the second S, which is sinks. We need to support and enhance the sinks of carbon dioxide in nature. And the third S that we haven't talked about yet, so we have sources, we have sinks, and the third S is society. We need to help society achieve broader transformations. So this, everybody, this is the Drawdown framework for climate solutions. And these are the 3 interconnected areas for action that we need to pursue globally, simultaneously, and with determination. So today, I'm going to provide you with an overview of climate solutions that we have in hand today. These, like I mentioned before, are not 10 years down the road. These are solutions that we know work, we know are financially feasible, we know that they can scale, and they can help us reach drawdown and really begin to come back into balance with the planet's living systems. These solutions that we've studied are tools of possibility in the face of a seemingly impossible challenge. Most of you here are already part of the chorus of people who are working on climate solutions, but there might be people in your Rotary Clubs, in your communities, who aren't yet part of the chorus. So one way to connect people and to connect with people rather over climate is really to start with our shared values. And as an example, that's how I connected with, one of our most conservative assembly members. So I want to think about something you're all very familiar with, the four-way test, right? The four-way test is the Rotarians, it's your ethical guidepost. It's a way of knowing how to proceed within our complex world. And the four-way test consists of these questions. Is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and friendships? And will it be beneficial to all concerned? Well, why in the world, Elizabeth, are you bringing this up today? Great question. Let's think about whether or not how climate solutions might map onto the four-way test. So is climate change the truth? Well, the answer is yes, it absolutely is. So we have known since Eunice Foote's work in the 1850s that digging up and then burning coal, oil, and natural gas produces these heat-trapping gases that are wrapping that extra thick blanket around the planet. So since then, we know that thousands of studies and millions of data points have confirmed that, yes, it's true. So we know that the climate is changing, that humans are responsible, and the impacts are serious. So here is the concentration of carbon dioxide over time, that same red squiggly line we talked about with the moment of drawdown. And here is the temperature increase over time that we see building right stair-stepping along with the concentration of those heat-trapping gases. So we know that, is it true? Yes. In fact, in the last 50 years, we might wonder, okay, so it's true, but is the situation hopeless? Well, let's look at this for a second. So what we've seen over time is we've seen in the last 50 years that global population has increased, the urban population has increased, and the GDP has increased. So what we're actually seeing is that in the last 50 years, while we have definitely struggled a lot when it comes to climate change, we actually are seeing huge increases in population, in economy. Also, however, food demand, water use, and fossil fuels. Flipping it on its head, though, we've seen more changes in the last 50 years than the entire sum of human history combined. So let's think about that. For any of us who are 50 years old, just in those 50 years, we have seen more changes than the entire sum of human history combined. Now, those changes have not all been bad, though. We've seen some things that have been really rough. We've also seen that now we live longer lives. We have smaller families and we are more literate. We are more urban, more mobile, and more connected, and actually less violent. So in this moment of transition, is climate change the truth? Yes, absolutely. And in the last 50 years, we've seen lots of changes, some of which have been challenging, others that have been incredibly beneficial. Now, pivoting to, is it fair to all concerned? Well, is climate change fair? It's absolutely not. We know that the poorest and the most vulnerable among us, those who have really done the least to contribute to the problem, are the most impacted. These include women and children, farmers struggling to raise their crops, coastal residents losing their land to sea level rise and erosion, and indigenous people in the Arctic whose traditions are threatened and whose homes are being displaced by rising seas and thawing permafrost. Now, we know that climate solutions can advance social and economic equity if they're utilized wisely and well, with attention to who decides, who benefits, and how any drawbacks are mitigated. And we know that it takes intention, it takes care, and it takes courage to move solutions forward in ways that heal rather than deepen systemic injustices. And we have the opportunity and the obligation to co-create systems that are safe and equitable, ensuring that both people and the planet can thrive together. So climate solutions can and should be fair, and climate change is not at all. Now, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Well, we know that people and institutions of all kinds, in all places, have roles to play in this great transformation. And the solutions that we're going to discuss today are really a synthesis of collective wisdom and collective action that are unfolding across the globe. As we work together to put climate solutions in place in our communities, we can absolutely build goodwill and create better friendships, protecting our neighbors from the greatest impacts of climate change. Now, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Well, beyond addressing heat trapping gases, climate solutions can have what we call co-benefits that contribute to a better, more equitable world. For example, climate solutions are rarely just climate solutions. Those that curb air pollution are also health solutions. Others that protect and restore ecosystems are also biodiversity solutions. Many of those climate solutions create jobs, they foster resilience to climate impacts like storms and droughts, and they bring other environmental benefits like safeguarding water resources. So does climate change pass a four-way test? Well, climate solutions, absolutely. And how might you use this framing in your communities? Well, one way is to remember that we have shared values. And by beginning with those values, by showing our respect for our shared values, and then connecting the dots between what we already care about and the changing climate, we can absolutely have productive conversations about climate solutions in our communities. So what can you do? Well, we know that widespread awareness and understanding of climate solutions is really vital to kindle agency and affect change worldwide. And the world, our society, and future generations need all of us to be part of the solutions. So how do you do that? Well, that's really up to you. The image I'm showing right now is an image of youth marching for climate. That might not be your style, and that's okay. And I invite you to think about what your style is. How do you want to show up for climate? One thing you might want to consider is just talking about it. One of the most impactful things we can do is actually just talk about climate, and specifically climate solutions. You're taking a great step tonight on your climate journey just by being here learning with us today. So I encourage you to share what you're learning with your community. Now, one aspect of your community involves youth. And I appreciated Nilam mentioning the Rotaractors who are part of the work that you're doing. And unfortunately, in many places, youth don't really learn about ways that their careers can contribute to climate solutions. And we all have a role to play in the transformation that's ahead of us. And if we want to help youth know that what the climate crisis can mean for their future, I really want us to consider supporting them to integrate climate solutions into their future careers. A group called Climate Generation out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, created a documentary and an instructional supplement for educators or anyone to use for free with youth in their lives. And I'll be sharing some of those career paths with you today, because, you know, we often learn when we're young about being a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, you know, a handful of careers. But what's so exciting about this emerging green economy is the incredible green careers that all of us can step up and step into, including the youth in our lives. So here's an example of the great work. Here are some better pictures of the people I'm going to talk a little bit about today. So if you're interested in the documentary, I can also put this in the chat later, but this at the bottom, goclimategen.org/green STEM careers is how you can get a copy of their work. And we were fortunate enough to collaborate with them. They aligned all of the careers to the Project Drawdown solutions. So going back to that, the Climate Drawdown Solution Framework, this is our framework of solutions. And today I want to share stories. I want to share stories that, when put into place, those climate solutions really move us towards drawdown, and they help people and communities that we care about. So let's dive in and start with the electricity sector. We know that since the emergence of electrical systems in the late 1800s, we've created most of our electricity by using fossil fuels, by burning coal, oil, and natural gas. We've got that locked up energy of long buried plants and animals. And when it's turned into electricity, carbon dioxide spills out into the atmosphere as a byproduct. So when we think about the solutions in the electricity sector, This is one of the ways that we visualize it at Project Drawdown. So I'd like to introduce you to our not so scientific name for these, which is, we call it the bubble diagrams. And what you'll see here are you'll see two main categories of solutions. So within the electricity sector, the two main solution areas are shifting production and enhancing electricity. Another side note is the importance of improving the system. We know that an improved electrical system will be a huge, will have huge benefits in the long run. That's just a little harder to quantify. What you'll also notice are the different size bubbles. Now, all of these bubbles are scaled relative to one another. They are based on the amount of carbon dioxide equivalents, equivalent emissions that are avoided by implementing these solutions at a global scale. There's more details about all of the science behind it in the Drawdown review. What I want us to know for this talk is basically bigger doesn't mean better, right? So one of the big keys and big takeaways from this talk is really that we have loads of solutions at hand, and we need all of them. We need this whole mosaic of solutions to really reach Drawdown. So, for example, maybe some of the bigger ones don't make sense in Toronto, but a bunch of the little ones do. My ask of you is to explore the solutions and see which ones help you on your climate journey, right? We need all of them in place, and lots of different people around the world will find which ones work for them. So bigger doesn't necessarily mean better, or that you have to do the biggest ones first. We need all of them as quickly, safely, and equitably as possible. So today, I want to figure out, I want to talk a little bit about one person and one Rotarian in particular who's behind some incredible work focused on electricity. So in high school in Ohio, Nathan Thomas had the idea to repair computers and ship them to schools in a country that needed them. He quickly learned, however, that shipping is very expensive. And when he visited Uganda at the age of 18, he discovered that there were more immediate concerns than refurbished computers in Uganda. In Uganda, access to power is expensive, it's dirty, and it's inconsistent if it's available at all. Frequent blackouts interrupt learning, health centers are unable to keep vaccines on hand, and students with no access to power can't study after the sun sets. So while studying mechanical engineering at the University of Cincinnati, Nathan founded All We Are, a nonprofit bringing sustainable energy solutions to communities in Uganda. Now, not only is this a climate solution through shifting production to renewables, this solution also has co-benefits. It also decreases energy costs by up to 80%. It improves student learning performance, and it helps communities thrive. Now, in the last 5 years, the Solarize Uganda Now project has completed 32 LED solar installations at 26 Ugandan schools, 2 medical clinics, and a women's center. They've installed 3 solar-powered wells, and their work was done in partnership with the Raleigh Midtown Club, the Rotary Club of Cincinnati, the Rotary Club of in Kampala, District 7710, 9211, and 6670, and others. What incredible work coming out of from Nathan. Now, Nathan is, he was president of the Rotary Club of Raleigh Midtown at the age of 23. He's the future district governor in 2022, and you might have read about him in a recent issue of the Rotarian magazine. So to get involved with this project, feel free to reach out to Nathan. He is doing incredible work, and there's always more to be done in terms of putting electricity climate solutions into place around the world. So switching from electricity to food, agriculture, and land use, another huge opportunity for us is to think about the ways we grow and use food. So solutions in the food, agriculture, and land use sector really focus on addressing food waste and diets, shifting agricultural practices, and protecting ecosystems. And today I want to talk about food waste. About 1/3 of the world's food is never eaten, which means that the land and the resources used and the heat trapping gases emitted in producing that food were completely unnecessary. But we know that food waste is absolutely a solvable problem, and it's a problem that can be solved through innovative partnerships. And there are some incredible Rotarians working on that right now. So, for example, Joe Richardson of Frederick County, Maryland, read about Project Drawdown's climate solutions, and he decided to bring together partners to focus on reducing food waste and increasing composting. So Joe is a member of the Southern Frederick Rotary Club in Maryland, and he brought together Rotary volunteers, school officials, a group called Key Compost, and most importantly, youth, to take action by sorting out food waste, liquids, and recyclables in 13 Frederick County schools. They weighed the waste to measure the impact, and they now have the food waste picked up and composted off-site. And Joe and his partners are not slowing down. And I invite you, he has this freely available, a lunch out of landfills toolkit that helps you get started. So if you're interested in learning more about lunch out of landfills, I highly recommend checking out lunch out of landfills and seeing how that might apply in your communities. When we think about industry, from concrete to computers, cars to clothing, industry is the sector of production that makes them all. Excuse me. And solutions in the industry sector might seem like solutions that only large multinational companies can work on, but it's not the case. And in the industry sector, there are solutions related to how we use waste, like composting and recycling, and even addressing refrigerants. So what are refrigerants, you might ask? Well, refrigerants are those incredible gases that trap a lot of heat so that our air conditioners cool our homes and our refrigerators keep our food cold. Now, unfortunately, refrigerants, which are often known as CFCs, HCFCs, and there's a trademark name of Freon, keep doing their job when they're released. So if there's an old air conditioner or refrigerator, those molecules can be released into the atmosphere. And unfortunately, they keep doing their job, and they are very, very potent heat trapping gases. They often leak during disposal or even during use. So these refrigerants are found all over the world. And several years ago, City Waste Recycling in Accra, Ghana, learned about a large cache of these unused canisters, and they were looking for someone to help them out. And thankfully, they found a group in Chicago called Tradewater, who had a kiln that could incinerate the refrigerants and make it a benign mixture that can then be released into the atmosphere. Tradewater worked with Intuit, the maker of QuickBooks and TurboTax, as a way for Intuit to offset some of their carbon emissions, and they were able to sweep up all of those refrigerants in Ghana. Now, you might be wondering, well, how does that relate to me? I'm probably not going to do anything like that. Well, here's one suggestion of something you might do. What about talking to the youth in your lives about possible career connections that they can have related to refrigerant management? I'd like to introduce you to Elise Sorensen. Elise is a chemist at Train Technologies, where she works to understand the intersection of refrigerants with different materials that Train uses to build their products. And her job is an incredible climate solution when she evaluates and identifies sustainable refrigerants that can be used in products. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a project that you put into place. Your project could be talking about climate solutions and climate careers with young people in your lives. We know that transportation and specifically mobility has played a really complex and critical role in shaping society, but most of the ways we get around rely on burning gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel. So I'm still looking for a great example of a Rotary-led project related to transportation solutions. Maybe your community will be a trailblazer in this space. In Sitka, Alaska, where I live right now, we have a task force working on providing training for the automotive technicians on this island so that people can drive electric cars with the assurance that there's someone on the island who can fix them. We need people like Jukka Kokkonen. He's an electric vehicle consultant who's really willing to work in a space that's rapidly changing, and it's critical to supporting the transitions we need to make to reach drawdown within our transportation system. We also know that buildings are major drivers of emissions, and some stem from the materials that make up the buildings, and some stem from the process of construction, renovation, and demolition, what we call embodied carbon. But many other emissions are the result of ongoing use. And that's where we can focus on things like energy efficiency, which those of you in Toronto know very well. An example of an incredible community project actually comes out of Buffalo, New York. And Buffalo is a city filled with old houses that really challenge their residents with high heating costs that are generated by long and demanding winters. And it's not unusual for a heating bill to come in at or even higher than the cost of rent. There are hundreds of area residents working with a group called Push Buffalo, People United for Sustainable Housing, in efforts to weatherproof homes, install solar energy systems, and work together to gain climate resilience. And one of the people necessary for that kind of work is someone like Katie Reamer. She's really critical to improving the energy efficiency in buildings. And there are so many careers that can make our homes, our schools, and our community buildings more energy efficient. And the careers are diverse. They can be found all across the world, and they include things like construction and manufacturing and changing the way that we use energy in our homes. So wrapping up sources, we know that we need to reduce the sources of those heat trapping gases. We also need to improve the sinks. And one of the things we want to focus on is improving land sinks, specifically the ways that our soil can absorb carbon. And one great example of that is the Rotary Club in Rosebell on the island of Mauritius. They launched the 1 Million Trees Project as a community-wide effort to plant 1 million trees in Mauritius before the year 2030. They want to have everyone plant at least one tree, and that's something that you might be interested in learning more about. There's a case study about them written on the SREG website. That's the Environmental Sustainability Rotary Action Group, sreg.org. They have a whole tree planting guide. So if you're interested in doing more tree planting, I encourage you to check them out. So moving beyond land sinks, we also have coastal and ocean sinks. And this is an area that looks very sparse, and it is. We actually have 6 brand new solutions that will be coming out in the next couple of months. And one of the solution areas that people around the world, and specifically in Rotary, have focused on, and this is the Rotaract Club in New Kingston, Jamaica. They planted 50 mangrove trees. So we know that protecting ecosystems, including mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrass meadows, supports ongoing photosynthesis and carbon storage. And also, the mangroves have the co-benefit of protecting communities from the impacts of intense storms. So we know we need to reduce sources, we need to support sinks, and the last S is we need to improve society. And improving society includes solutions that we should implement anyway, even if climate change wasn't an issue. We know that by developing a more equitable society, we can absolutely help with climate change. Climate and social systems are profoundly connected, and those connections open up solutions that are often overlooked. Some initiatives that are designed primarily to ensure the rights and foster equality of women and girls also have cascading benefits to climate change. They include things like high quality voluntary reproductive health care and high quality inclusive education, which are fundamental human rights and cornerstones of gender equality. So in more indirect ways, making strides in health and education can also benefit climate. So if we do all of these things, if we reduce sources by implementing solutions focused on electricity, food, agriculture, and land use, industry, transportation, and buildings, if we support sinks on land and in the ocean, and if we improve society through healthcare and education, we can actually reach drawdown. So I've shared a few climate solutions with you today, and you have so many more climate solutions underway in your communities. What's next? What's next? What do you want to reach towards? The reality of intervening in a complex system is that no one can do it all. And we all have an opening to show up as problem solvers and as change agents and contribute in significant ways, even when we feel small. How might you use the 4-way test to engage your community in climate solutions? While you might consider joining your district environmental group, you also might consider joining SREG, which is working on climate-focused, there's a climate-focused steering committee. They have 3 groups focused on education, strategy, and collaborative relationships. And what I'd like to invite you to do now is actually warm up your fingers again, go back to the chat box, and I'd like to ask you the same question that I asked at the beginning. What comes to mind when you think of climate change and global warming? Go ahead and type some answers in the chat, please. All right, I'm seeing possibilities, I'm seeing solutions, I'm seeing solar energy, windmills, opportunities, trees, results, solutions. I'm seeing, holy moly, you all are really loading up the chat. Thank you so much for thinking through the different ways that we can reach towards things in our communities, because we are really living in a time of dramatic transformation, from our rural areas in the Toronto area to the urban areas and everywhere in between. The basic physics, chemistry, and biology of this planet make that non-negotiable. Stasis is not an option. And society has a choice to make about what transformation will take. Will we employ collective courage and determination and the diversity of existing solutions to move the world towards a balance with the planet's living systems? Will we pursue climate action in ways that heal systemic injustices and foster resilience, well-being, and equality? Who will we choose to be in this pivotal moment of human history? Because together we can leverage the solutions in hand today to build a bridge from where we are now to the world that we want for ourselves, for all life, and most importantly, for future generations yet to come. A better path is still possible, and may we turn that possibility into reality. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There are a few questions here. I think our DG Mark has been looking at it.
Yes, Nilam, there are a couple of questions, some very thought-provoking ones. Cora asked the question, what social and economic policies does Project Drawdown advocate for as necessary as part of the solution framework?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So we are in an interesting, this is a super boring answer, but we're in an interesting tax bracket in the United States, which means we're a 501c3, which means we can't do much direct lobbying. Now, that said, we work with groups all over the world to support their efforts on policy work. And we know that there are communities that use the Project Drawdown framework to create their climate action plans in their communities. A great example is Cincinnati. The city of Cincinnati has done that. And so we support that we support their work. We also, this is probably a little premature, but we have a new director of partnerships. And one of the things she's going to be working on is working with more local and regional level policymakers to ensure that they have the information and the confidence they need to put these solutions into place. One of the real gaps we see in terms of shaping policy as well as getting to the implementation stage is just that people don't know, right? So there is a real, not only just a knowledge gap, but then also that like next step inspiration gap. And that's an area that we know we can really help with. So we invite you, please feel free to use the framework to frame any conversations that you might have with your policymakers, and also to connect with policymakers who have used the framework in the past to learn from them, so we can kind of stand on their shoulders and just keep getting better and better, right? Instead of starting at zero, we can leverage work that other people have already done. Yeah, thanks so much for that question.
Thanks, Dr. Bagley. Interesting question from Paul. He asked, how can tree planting in temperate and subarctic zones compensate for the mass removal of trees in tropical zones such as in Brazil, which have larger trees, longer growth seasons, and more rapid growth?
That is great. Thank you so much. I'm awkwardly looking at my screen because I'm going to put something in the chat. There's a really interesting, where do I want to send you? Google has a really interesting tool, and I'm not trying to say that Google is the best company in the world. But I do want to say that they have a really incredible tool that might help answer some of those questions. I'm going to pop that in the chat box right now. Give me 1 second. It's called the Environmental Insights Explorer. And just last week, they came out with a new, there are all these layers. And I know Toronto is one of the cities that they focused on, and the surrounding regions, where you can build a resilient, sustainable future for your city. And one of the layers that they have using satellite data, I believe from Planet Labs, is understanding the amount of tree cover and the possibility for future tree cover. Now, that's not exactly answering the question. The question is a little more complicated when we think about the trade-offs of, not every tree is created equal, and not every tree in every place is created equal. The best place for that, and this is getting really nerdy for those of you who want to get really nerdy with me, is actually a lab in Zurich, Switzerland called the Crowther Lab. And they are the world experts on really understanding what kind of trees should be planted where and when, and how they should be cared for, because just planting a tree and not actually getting it to a place where it's going to start storing large amounts of carbon is probably not super useful, right? We want to make sure that the trees we're planting are the right trees in the right place, able to start really storing carbon. So I don't know that exactly answered the question. I threw those two the two sites there. But yeah, happy to talk more about that anytime.
And can I add some local resources as well? Because here I know some of our clubs are involved in tree planting. They've been working with local organizations, Highway of the Heroes, etc. We have a very strong Federation of Ontario Nature. And so our committee is actually building some linkages to those as well. So there is some practical guidance available there.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much, Nilam. I'll also put another thing in the chat. Apologies for just kind of totally spamming your chat. I just put our website, which I put you directly to the events page. On the 16th of December, our executive director, Jonathan Foley, is going to be giving a webinar at 1 o'clock 1 o'clock Eastern that you might be interested in. It's about an hour and a half where he's really going to dive deep and go pretty nerdy. It's very, very accessible, but he'll also, and he's a global expert on climate change, and he will be able to give lots of insights about that as well. So if you didn't get quite enough about climate solutions, Dr. Foley will have lots of content for us on the 16th.
Thank you. The questions are pouring in, so we're gonna have to take maybe a couple, just being sensitive to time. Otherwise, we'll be here until midnight. But it shows a lot of interest in the topic. Past Sister Governor Mary Lou Harrison asked the question, when in the past have we had success in implementing change around the environment? And she cites the acid rain situation as an example.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example. I think we have, let's see, we've had lots of success at lots of different levels. I would say, I wish I don't have it behind me anymore, but we have part of the Drawdown review is a discussion about accelerators. And one of the things that we think a lot about at Project Drawdown is that it's not enough just to know the solutions, right? We know the solutions, but we also know that we need to shape culture, and we need to build power, and we need to set goals and alter rules and policy, and we need to, shift money into these spaces. So I would say that examples, asbestos is another great example. I'm just spinning through it in my head, right? Asbestos is another great example. And those movements were approached from all different angles, right? So it's not just, I think there's an opportunity for all of us to step up in lots of different ways and lots of different places to really start shifting change and getting those, and getting those changes put into place.
All right. Sudeep asked a question, how can we get children interested in climate change as they are the future?
I love that. And I love that you're absolutely right. They're the future, and they're really scared. I talk to youth pretty often, and, unfortunately, a lot of what they hear about in school, almost all what they hear about in the media is really scary. And there's a reason for that, right? What we're facing is really scary. And that leaves a lot of people feeling really powerless. So how might we, as, the generations who can support them, really provide some hope, provide some solutions, provide opportunities for them to explore the best ways for them to plug into climate solutions. So for example, there are one suggestion I might make is, if you have a youth in your life who's interested in climate, help them find a group that they can join, where they can learn with other people, maybe other youth, maybe people of all different ages, and really give them an opportunity to work on projects and to really figure out what they want to do within that space. So I would look for groups. I would also listen to them, be an active and supportive listener, and know that they are inheriting an earth that is really different from the earth that we inherited when all of us were born, and let them know that you're working on solutions and then you want to work alongside them.
Very good. So speaking of solutions, this will be the last question, because I think we just have a few more people to wrap things up. But in the line of solutions, Dan Coombs asked the question, what are the top 3 things that we can do as individuals to impact climate change? And he cites a couple examples, limiting food waste in our homes, etc. But what are the top 3 things that we can do ourselves to help climate change?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. I'm gonna give you less of a, I'm looking for a paper also. I'm giving you less of a specific, these are what you need to do, which might sound like a cop-out, but it really depends. It depends on where you are. It depends on what's going on in your, what is most relevant and approachable for you. I'm going to pop this into, I don't know that this is exactly the right the right link, but Kim Nicholas is a professor who wrote an incredible paper where she looked specifically, there it is, at the high impact climate action. So when we think about individual high impact action, she's got a great graphic on that page that y'all might want to check out. She specifically looks at the impact of having one fewer child, and she goes into all of the research behind that, living car-free and avoiding a round-trip transatlantic flight as the 3 most impactful personal choices that we can make. Now, that doesn't mean that she's anti-children or any of those things. Those are that's the data, pure and simple. Eating a plant-based diet is right up there as one of the high impact things. And so my encouragement to you is to figure out what next step you might be able to take on your climate journey. One of the frames that I don't want us to leave with is thinking that climate solutions mean a lower quality of life, because they absolutely don't, right? Most of the climate solutions that we know we need to put into place actually improve the quality of human life. And so we don't need to, and so that's really a focus I want us to remember, that we've had these co-benefits with the climate solutions. We don't have to, it doesn't have to be a total bummer to work on climate solutions.
Very good. I'm looking to Nilam or Beth. How's their time check there?
Well, I think we have a few minutes here, but we're probably close to wrapping up. I know there were a lot of questions, and Dr. Bagley has put in a ton of suggestions. And what my suggestion for everyone is, if there are things that we didn't get around to, please do reach out to our committee. We are happy to organize speakers, further discussion, because some of these questions do not end up, within a 1 hour time frame. So lots of good questions. I'll put my contact in there. But at the same time, I would also like to see whether, as we are wrapping it up, if any individual clubs are doing some interesting projects, just feel to put those in the chat, because I think that's also part of the learning and sharing for us.
Are we going to share the chat items, because there's a lot of great links there? I know Dr. Bagley has put a few links there.
We'll compile those and we'll share them with everyone.
Excellent.
So with that, I think maybe we should hand the mic back to you, DG Mark, so that you can do an official thank you to our fantastic speaker. And
I think, is that back to Beth, or is that back to me?
I think
That's back to you, Mark.
Back to me. Oh, these wonderful surprises. Well, I've been chatting with Dr. Bagley for the past few minutes, talking about what's on the chat. And obviously there's a lot of interest in our district and Rotary. I loved how you integrated the Rotary four-way test into your talk about global climate solutions. That was brilliant, and you seem to have a great understanding and connection with Rotary. So thank you. It was a wonderful presentation. Obviously, you're aware that the 7th area of focus for Rotary is now environmental action, and we were very proud to kick off the environmental committee with Nilam as our chair this year. And I know there's going to be a lot of great things to come. Even in the chat, there's a great oak tree project. We're saving a 250-year-old tree in downtown Toronto, which will consume a lot of carbon as well. And we also have on April 24th, we have the Great Lakes Watershed Cleanup, and we're one of 11 districts that are going to be participating in as part of the Earth Day on the 21st. On the 24th, we're going to be participating in cleaning up the waterways with plastic and garbage around that. So there is a real commitment and focus within our district around the environment. So to have you here tonight has been a real pleasure, and is certainly appropriate for what we're trying to do in this area. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you again. You're part of our district now. You're an honorary Rotarian in District 7070. So thanks again. Are you going to now talk about next month's Tuesday Talk, Beth?
Before we do that, could I add an addendum, DG Mark, to your reference to the 250-year-old oak? Now, that is not just an ordinary oak tree. It has a lot of indigenous significance. It's a heritage tree. And I think when some of the Rotarians got involved, although it is in one aspect of Toronto, but I think it's of significance to all of Ontario. And the set goal was, to raise over $400,000. I'm happy to report that the city has whittled that down, and with help from Rotarians, down to less than 10,000. So of all those attending here tonight, I think Mary Lou has put a little link in there too. So even a few dollars from your Christmas lunch will help. So I'll, back to you, Beth.
So
Okay,
we'll talk.
so I'm going
Go
to
ahead,
turn it over to Mary Lou, past District Governor Mary Lou Harrison, who is going to introduce our January Tuesday Talk, which is going to focus on public image. So Mary Lou, over to you.
All right, thank you, past District Governor Beth. Sorry for my spelling error. I just put in the chat. You'll know what the word is, recognition. So we are really delighted to be pulling together a stellar Tuesday talk on Rotary's public image. And it's going to feature some of our own social media and public image stars in our district, but also some of the amazing folks from the zones 28 and 32 Rotary public image team. But if you have still your fingers on the keyboard, please just throw in the chat here what it is that you want to learn. Because our hope is to give you some great tips and tricks, but also to divide you out into some breakout sessions during our next Tuesday talk so that you can talk and learn from each other. And then we would have experts in each of those breakout sessions. So just throw in there in the chat what it is that you want to learn. And that will help us as we plan the session. And I really would like to say that I think there's a great segue and a great connection between this amazing talk and knowledge base, Elizabeth, that you've shared with us tonight, and Rotary's public image. People want to be involved with things that are relevant, and solutions for climate change are relevant to every last one of us. And if we can talk about what Rotary does to help implement solutions around the environment, that's a super easy way to increase our public image. So thanks for putting your thoughts in the chat, and I look forward to seeing everybody in January. And thank you to everyone who supported the tree project. Keep those cards, letters, and checks rolling in, because that will also help our public image. The more money Rotary brings to the table, the more we're going to be involved in the signage and the ongoing program at that particular site.
All right, Beth, back to you.
Okay, so I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. It was a great session. Really enjoyed everybody's participation and questions for our guest speaker. And We look forward to seeing you in January for our January Tuesday talk on public image. So all the best of the holiday season to you. Stay well.
Thanks, Dr. Bagley. Thanks, Nilam. Thanks, Beth. And thank you, Charles, for coordinating this. Wonderful evening. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.
Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Mary Lou.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
You were
My pleasure.
good making all those comments in the chat. Thank you.
I can't
Yes.
keep my mouth shut when my fingers quiet. So there you go.
Well,
You know me. Just tell me to shut up anytime.
well,
We have to save the chat.